the next gen science standards. So this is taken right from the Next Generation Science Standards website. And the box at the top is the performance expectation for this module, the science performance expectations. And this is where students are going to use materials to design a solution to a human problem by mimicking plants and animals and their external parts. So it sounds like it's pretty sophisticated for first graders, but the sessions really build upon each other so that by the end, the students can be successful with the performance task. And I actually remember teaching the first set of lessons in a first grade classroom this year and kind of guiding the teacher. And I remember the teacher telling me at the end, I did not think the students were going to be able to do this, but they did. They came through. So it was kind of exciting to see that the students could meet this pretty rigorous challenge. If you look at the boxes below, you see the science and engineering practices in the blue, the disciplinary core ideas, and the cross-cutting concepts. And these are all the elements that go into the performance expectation. So every module is going to have some of the engineering practices. The DCI is really the content that the students will learn. And then the cross-cutting concepts are the scientific ideas that cut across all scientific domains. So every lesson sort of builds a bridge between what's familiar to the students and then to the broader knowledge about the way the world works. So for example, for this module, students know that they have legs to walk, they have arms, they have hands or a mouth that helps them eat. So that's familiar to them. Then they learn about animals and plants and their structures. So a bird has a beak and that helps it eat. So they start with what's familiar, what they know, and then we broaden that to the larger world. The modules also have evidence of our early literacy essential practices, which is a large statewide initiative. And these are essential learning practices that should be alive and well in every classroom, every day. It's sort of like a minimum standard of care that you might hear of when you're learning about medical practice. It's sort of the same thing for educational practice. And so what we like to show teachers is that throughout each module, there is evidence of these essential practices. So that's just one example up there. That's essential practice 2, and it refers to the read-alouds. So with each module, there is a performance task at the end. So the learning sessions build, as I said earlier, and so as students progress through the learning sessions and they acquire the content, the concepts, and the skills, by the end they are prepared to demonstrate their understanding through a performance task. And this performance task also requires students to respond to that initial essential question. And this could be a design challenge, like this particular module. Students are creating a design for a solution. It could be an essay. It could be a Google slide presentation. We like to add a lot of variety, so we don't want to have the same performance task for every module. But in this case, students are considering a problem that they see in the world, a first grade size problem. And then they are creating a solution inspired by nature, by what they learned about plant and animal structures. And it was really exciting to see the very creative solutions that our first graders came up with. The thinking was pretty amazing. And I do have some examples to show you at the end. So the core content of each lesson is reinforced through a read aloud. So the students' listening comprehension far exceeds their reading comprehension. So we're able to provide a lot of this content through read-alouds that have complex ideas and some really wonderful images that students can use to learn the content. So I'm going to take you through just a couple of sample lessons, and this is the fun part where you can see some of the kids' work. Every module begins with some sort of an anchoring phenomenon, and this anchors the students into the work of the module, and we also introduce the essential question here. This is an image of the Google Classroom. All of the modules are stored and organized in a Google Classroom. And so you can see here, there is an anchoring phenomenon overview, lesson plan, any text that the students use, any materials that they need. And then as time goes by, we're adding more and more student samples of writing and exemplars that teachers can use to help guide them. So in this phenomenon, it started with a read aloud, and then the teacher used a lot of questioning techniques, and through this read aloud, they encouraged students to make that connection between the owl's body parts and their uses, with the example of wings that are used to fly. So that starts the kids thinking and making those connections between an animal's parts, and then eventually we call them structures, and their uses. And then eventually we use the word function. So we gradually take the students through and start expanding their vocabulary as well. So this sort of lays the groundwork for the students around that disciplinary core idea. SEP stands for Science and Engineering Practice, and so this is SEP 1, and that is asking questions and defining problems. And one of the ways that we encourage teachers to do this is by providing a question board in the room and consistently encouraging students to ask questions, and then they're posted on this question board, and then throughout the sessions it's referenced, and then teachers address the questions as they go. And this is really important because we want students to ask their own questions and then inquire and learn about the world through their questions. So this is a really important science and engineering practice. And then this is an example of the anchoring activity in this first anchor lesson. And so the students were given cards. These were all cut up and in baggies. And for this year, they did it individually. Normally, they would do it with a partner. And so there were pictures of plants, animals, and then human products. And what they had to do was line up all the animal and plant cards, and then all the human product cards. And then they had to decide which ones matched. So for example, they might match the bird with the airplane, because the bird's wings help the bird fly. And then we were inspired by the bird to come up with the solution of an airplane to help us fly. So this was a way to get them acquainted and thinking about the material. And this is all part of that first anchoring lesson. And this was one of the examples of when the teacher didn't really think that the students would be able to do this. And then I just said, let's just wait and see what happens. And as we walked around, the kinds of conversations the kids were having and the thinking that they were engaging in was wonderful. And every student was able to do this. And so this lesson really grounded them in the work and set the stage for the rest of the module. And again, this is just more evidence of the ELA standards and the essential practices. So we've got the read aloud, and then the questioning, ask and answering questions throughout. And then the vocabulary, stopping and introducing sophisticated vocabulary with kid-friendly definitions, and then moving right along through the lessons, and then revisiting those words later on. And then this is standard 3, encouraging the students to make those scientific connections as they read and listen. And then, of course, the core vocabulary that we introduce as those vocabulary words unfold, focusing on those vocabulary words, first introducing them, and then using them, and then expecting students to use them in their conversation and in their writing, and highlighting those opportunities when you hear the students use those words, and when you see the words in the writing, which is really exciting to see. So those are 3 examples of the core vocabulary that you would find during these module lessons. And then, of course, after doing the matching and sorting activity, we want students to communicate their understanding in writing. So this would be one example of a writing activity, a quick write, as we call them, just to give students a chance to communicate their ideas and also see themselves as readers and writers. And these are some examples. As I said, this was first trimester, beginning of the year, independent writing. So the students chose one of their matches, and then they wrote the connection on paper. I'm happy to translate that if you want me to. And then here's another example. This student just glued the picture right on the page, which is great. And then you might see the CUPS at the bottom. That's one of the Orton-Gillingham strategies that the teacher was using and incorporating into the science. And one of the strategies is to circle the words you're not sure of, and then go back and take a closer look. I love this one here. The shower is like the elephant because the elephant's trunk sprays the water. And then this is an example of session 1. And again, you see the,
sorry.
That's okay.
No, I like
So you see the lesson plan, the writing tasks. I just really wanted to show that everything is contained within each session within the Google Classroom.
And that was a thing we changed this year. It was a Google slideshow that teachers used as like their teacher guide. And this year, as we move to being remote in different times of the year, teachers work to help put these units into a Google Classroom so everything was right there and then they could use it with students.
And then we actually took it one step further, as you know. We took each session and we created the session on a slideshow so that virtual teachers or in-person teachers could present the lesson from beginning to end using the series of slides. And we had curriculum writers, myself, some coaches, and some key teachers engaged in that work. And teachers found it extremely helpful and supportive. So that was something we added to the curriculum writing process as well. So here's another example. Taking one step further into the series of lessons and reinforcing the idea that animals use their parts for specific functions. They use their structures for specific functions. So here we took a virtual field trip to the Detroit Zoo and the San Diego Zoo. So if you were to click on that, you would actually see live, it's a live webcam, the penguins walking around. Some were taking a dive and playing, and you know, of course you could imagine the students got very excited at this point, and they were talking about, you know, what they observed in at the zoo, what the animals were doing, and then how they were using their wings, or so on and so forth. So it was exciting to be able to see that in real time, and you really started to hear the students use the language, using structure and function, and so on. And then we taught them to record their observations, which is a form of data, onto the table. And of course, this would begin with the teacher modeling the process and then giving the students a chance to try it out on their own. And then we take all of those observations that we collected, and together as a class, we created a writing piece, a paragraph. So the great thing about that is it's the students' ideas, it's their observations. The teacher is guiding the process, but the students are contributing the ideas. So if you look and see what the underlined part, at that point the teacher paused, the students turn and talk, share their ideas, and then she chooses one of the students' ideas to add to the paragraph and then continues to write. So that's called a shared writing. And then the teacher in the class would practice reading it a couple of times for fluency. And then if you go to the next page, the students then got a chance to write their own idea. So that way it wasn't just one person's sentence. Each student got to write their example right there and then illustrate it. And then again, with lots of confidence, they were able to read that shared writing and reading piece. So again, these are ways that we incorporate the reading, the writing, the communicating ideas, the collecting evidence, and the scientific concepts all in a tight lesson each day. And then I wanted to show you here how independent reading is an important piece of these sessions. And according to the essential practices, it's very important to provide choice to motivate and engage students. So students often have a choice of reading material that they are interested in, that they can successfully read. So this would be an example of choices. And then from there, after reading, then they're able to communicate their ideas in writing. In this case, they were to write about a structure and then how the animal used its structure. So here are some examples from the books that they read. I love the upside down penguin.
Yeah.
This person had 3 details, which was wonderful, about sea turtles. And again, really understanding that connection between structure and function. So then if you can imagine the students going through several more sessions, they get to the performance task at the end. And each session was, built upon each other so that they progressed and acquired more skill, more content, and a greater understanding of how nature inspires us to develop solutions to problems. So at the end, during their performance task, they determine a problem that they see in the world and then a solution to that problem. So this one is I love this one. We have this problem of being able to scratch our back. It's very hard to reach our back. And we know that bears use the bark of trees, and so why wouldn't we? So this solution is a big Velcro piece that you would then attach and then use it to scratch your back. And so the students had a graphic organizer to use to plan out their design, and then the teacher modeled the process of taking their ideas and incorporating it into a writing piece. And this one was really interesting. I learned that porcupines actually shoot their quills out when they feel there's danger as a defense mechanism. So then this student designed a solution to a problem of burglars coming to their homes. And so it was a device that shot out, it was a shell that shot out quills to, fend off the burglar. And then this one, this was interesting. It's a garbage collector. So when you have garbage outside on the sidewalk, you want to be able to pick it up without getting your hands dirty. So this was some kind of device that was a pole that had a fork at the end. And then you could just, stick it into the garbage and pick it up. Just like an alligator's teeth. And then this one is called Mary Mud. And it's a special lotion that cools you off and protects you from the sun, which is mud. It's mud in a bottle.
Good.
So.
We'll just go.
And then, that
Am I clicking on that?
That was the scope and
Okay.
sequence. I think we're okay.
Okay.
All right, so that was just a very quick example to give you a little bit of a foundation and then a quick example of what that looks like in the classroom, incorporating reading, writing, and science. And of course, we do that with social studies, and then we have individual modules that focus on literature, incorporating reading and writing.
So we began this process last year, actually 2 years ago with some pilot units, but then last year we rolled out units for second, third, and fourth grade. We started before we closed schools. Kindergarten and first grade had an online professional development experience, and it wasn't as supportive as our second and third and fourth grade teachers had, and so This year, we've been providing as many lessons as we can produce, as many modules as we can produce in order to support teachers. As we've reached this last trimester, we do not have new ones for everyone for all the way to the end of the year, but teachers are brainstorming in their district teams ways to possibly take things they did last year and amp it up based on what they've learned this year through these modules. So this curriculum writing group that we have had working with Jen, each grade level teachers volunteer to help write units based on understanding by design, so backwards design. What assessment do we want kids to know? What answer to the big question do we want them to know? And then we create the experiences for that. And I know I presented some of this 2 years ago as we just started this journey, and so we just wanted to take a few minutes and update you and share with you some of the great things that have been happening.
Any questions? Go ahead, Ms. Bradford.
Thank you. Boy, these look really great. This looks awesome. I wondered how many units, like for example, in kindergarten or first grade, how many units would be developed for science across the curriculum?
That's a great question. So overall, we have 3 modules per trimester, a science, a social studies, and a literature. When it comes to science, we have a life science module, a physical science module, and an earth science module to make sure that we are addressing standards in each domain of science.
Okay. And that would be for each grade level,
Yes,
K to 4?
yes.
Wow.
Now for kindergarten, the modules are much shorter.
Mhm.
So because we need to think about the kindergarten student, and what their attention span and, what they're able to accomplish. When you get to 4th grade, the modules are longer.
Sure. I just want to commend you there. I'm just so impressed with the students' writing. There's a lot of great writing up there, and I know it must take quite a bit of time to develop all these, the programs that you do. So thank you for doing that, and I know you're going to continue to make and create all sorts of great modules, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Burton.
Yes, and the teachers are the ones that are putting these together, is that correct?
It's been a combination of, well, I've written some of the pilots when we started the process, and then teacher teams. We've created curriculum writing teams, and then coaches have done some of the modules. So it's been really a group effort, but the majority of the modules have been written by teachers.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, thank them again for us. I'm sure some of them are probably watching tonight, knowing this is being presented tonight, but our staff does go way above and beyond, and the passion for making sure that our students are learning well shows when our staff is volunteering to work on modules like this, because these are really exciting and fun, and makes me really miss not being able to volunteer in schools right now because of COVID, but looking forward to getting back in there. One other question, how is it working? Teaching in person is just different than teaching virtually. We all understand that. What are we finding in the difference between the two with these? Are they fairly successful virtually? Are we hitting some struggles? What are your thoughts on that? Either one of you want to address that?
I can start.
Okay.
Okay. So it's been quite a learning curve. At the beginning of the year, teachers were really scrambling. They were sort of, the whole planet was thrown into this, right? So
Right.
teachers were thrown into this virtual world. And I have to say, I really marvel at how they've been able to just learn an enormous amount. And through trial and error also learn to be able to teach virtually in an effective way. I've joined sessions. I've observed teachers teaching, and what I found is they just keep finding new ways to get better. Writing was a real challenge. I mean, imagine writing, you're used to being right there next to the students, looking at their writing, talking them through, and now you have them on a screen. And teachers have learned effective ways to teach through Jamboards, through taking pictures, through giving verbal feedback, through the Google Classroom and other applications. And they have just learned along the way how to strengthen their ability to reach students virtually. They have had to modify some of the modules, especially some of the investigations, some of the experiments and investigations, but they have found ways to do these investigations through demos and then pausing and questioning the students and getting feedback and then continuing with the investigations. They've used certain apps to do some alternatives. And then, as I said earlier, the slideshows have really helped because they've created a lot of visuals for students to see in a nice sequence of lessons. So they've just really continued to learn different techniques and then just made modifications. And in some cases, they've just sent home the material so that students can be right there in front of the camera actually doing the investigations. In some cases, they've been able to do that.
Okay.
So typically, each month at the elementary levels, there's a materials pickup day for our Livonia virtual kids. And so these teachers are trying to plan a month ahead, right? So I might start Monday, but I also have to have materials for the next 4 weeks that my students are going to use. So that's been another piece of being on the treadmill this year, is we are trying to make sure that we get teachers enough materials, training to look at that new unit, and then turn around and plan out how they're going to send home those materials so that families and students have them. There is a journal that goes with each module, and that has a way for students to do some of those writing pieces all in one journal, so that then teachers at some schools, they might collect them and look at them and send them back. So, they all have their own processes for collecting those to being able to see student work. And then, but just having used those for about half of the year, teachers are already saying, so I have ways to make the journals better. So can we meet and make them, have more of maybe some of the articles in it, maybe some more of the graphics, so that they have some of those things. So we're already updating, as the year has gone on, the journals for next year, the first half of the year of journals from the fall. And that's one of the nice things, when you purchase a textbook, you do have to adjust a textbook, right? Not one textbook fits a whole group of kids. Usually textbooks are much larger than a year's worth of standards. When you're writing your own curriculum, some of these units that were in the very first year now have been taught, fixed, updated, changed, taught again, more feedback was given. Students are interviewed by the coaches, so what do you think went well? What do you think should be different in this unit? And then, so we have some third grade units who have been taught 4 times?
This would be the fourth time.
The
yes.
fourth time
Yep.
this spring. So that's amazing that we can then, continually update it based on what teachers and students tell us, they think would work better.
We have revision teams, and I meet with them and we go through and analyze the feedback, and then they reflect on their own experience teaching, and then put that together, and then they start tackling the revisions. It's pretty exciting to see so many teachers reflecting on their teaching practice and trying to make this, more effective and make it better. And that's really the best, scenario, when teachers are reflecting on their practice and then making each year a little bit better.
And then I imagine also that our students who are learning in person, they're utilizing these programs through Google Classroom also.
Absolutely.
So
Yes.
as we saw examples of some of their hands-on writing, I imagine that they're using some of their learning is hands-on in a paper pencil method, and some of it they're utilizing on their devices. So I imagine that their skills, even using their devices, are coming up,
Yes.
even though they're learning in person.
All
Yes.
modules have some digital text and some hand,
Okay,
physical
Excellent.
copies of text.
good. All right, thank you.
I had the opportunity to be a part of the pilot as a long-term sub during that science, that first year of science integrated. And it was overwhelming as the long-term sub. But even that team, which was a really strong team, and our teachers do a fantastic job, as we all know, of just rolling with whatever they're handed. But I know some of the feedback was, what were the prerequisite skills that students needed to know in order to be successful, have that kind of writing, in terms of note-taking? And I see that there's been adjustments to the modules, which is makes me happy to see that. My question is more, do the teachers have the opportunity to pace these lessons? Because I know at the time that I was tasked with this, there was a timeline, and it was a pretty strict timeline to have this rolled out. Has that changed?
So, oh, go ahead.
Nope, do
Oh.
it. I don't care.
So a couple of things. The first year it was rolled out, there was one module for the year that teachers had a chance to practice. And that was a little challenging to really grasp the concept of integration with only one module. What we're finding this year, now that teachers have multiple modules to teach, they're understanding this idea of you teach, you assess, and then where are we in relation to the standards? And then we set our goals for the next module. So they're starting to see that the idea isn't to master everything with the first module, it's to continuously teach, assess, reflect, and then plan for the next module. And so they're able to see now with multiple experiences how to help their students build that content concept and skills across a year. But I think in year one, when there was only one to try out, you couldn't get that big picture. And so I think what was happening is teachers were trying to have their students master those standards in one module experience. And so it took a long time to try to do that. So with year two, or for some year three, when you're teaching the multiple modules and you're seeing that growth and you're seeing that progression, you don't feel as that you need to repeat lessons or expand them over a few days. You understand that concept that this is a spiral, that we're going to continue to work on these skills and continue to build toward these end of year goals. So I think just teaching multiple modules has helped with that. But then in part two of that answer is the district teams are setting the pacing. So the teachers are actually deciding how many sessions they want to teach each week. So especially during this very challenging year when everything takes longer. So we're leaving it up to the district teams to decide what would be an appropriate goal with each module session, with each week. So I think that's helping a lot. And then what I'm hearing is that with more experience, they're not taking as long and it's not as much of an issue. So part of that was the new experience, and then wrapping your brains around the whole process. And then just with more familiarity, you're just going to be able to, move through more effectively. So does that help answer the question?
Yes, and I know that it was, I think, if I recall, it was like at the end of September or something that we received this. And so we were still getting to know our students.
Yes.
And so trying to figure out which student needed what differentiation in terms to be able to perform at this level was kind of a hard task.
Okay.
So just wondering, is it still being rolled out at the beginning of the school year?
Yes.
Okay.
However, I think there's a clearer understanding of what it means to launch a module in the first trimester. And coaches have been an integral part in this process of helping teachers understand that for that first trimester, you're launching the module. That second trimester, you're building upon the standards. And that third trimester, at the end, you're actually mastering the standards. So there's a lot more comfort with the modules this year, in particular with the support of the coaches. And so even though we are introducing modules for that first trimester, there's a little bit more familiarity and understanding of the process. So I feel like, the confidence is greater and then the tension is a little bit less for that first trimester.
And I will say the lessons, how they're built in terms of the videos the kids loved. I got to sub for first grade, and we did the BAT lesson. And they knew the vocabulary, they looked forward to the videos, and that's a wonderful part of these lessons. My concern is always like the writing, the performance task, and is there an opportunity for differentiation built into the lessons that the teachers receive?
Yes.
And I'll stop with my questions. Anybody else have questions? Ms. Bonnefield?
I just wanted to say, I find this fascinating, especially the fact that when we looked at it, it's like, even the teachers are like, yeah, this is way too much for our kids, and to give them our kids are so amazing,
Mhm.
right? And we don't always take that opportunity to maybe see what they can do. We're so concerned with, everybody being able to accomplish it that we never push
Mhm.
a little bit to see. And the kids, it seems, when we do that, actually, they thrive on that
Yes.
stuff. And then this is all, like, interesting. And then the other thing is some of the things that you talked about during this are, like, things that we talk about here on the processes and the procedures and, you know, the setup, and I heard some of those words about the committees that we do, you know, and how we even process stuff. So it's amazing. If these kids are starting in first grade if these kids are starting in first grade to learn this stuff, I mean, these are like real life skills that these kids, I mean, and they're first graders, right? It's not the first grade that I, you know, was in. So I think it's really fascinating, and just the style and not teaching at the kids and the collaboration and the thought process and the asking the question and being able to ask questions, right? And to wonder about things and not to be, and I know the whole writing and spelling thing, but bless their hearts, I just loved seeing all those papers with all those misspelled words, and the kids with the confidence to put that down on paper and not to see it come back with a bunch of red splotches all over it because there were some misspelled words, because they're doing stuff that's, you know, they're trying to write about things that, you know, the kids don't know how to spell those words yet. You know, giraffe is a tough word, right? And stuff like that. And to have the confidence to be able to write that stuff down, to be able to communicate and feel good about what they're doing, rather than feeling, you know, that, oh, I failed because I didn't spell giraffe right, you know, and I loved it. I thought it was great, especially seeing it as from a first grade perspective. If you had showed this for like maybe a 6th grade module or a 4th grade module, I think it still would be as fantastic, but that we're doing this with 6-year-olds, right?
5-year-olds.
6-year-olds is just, I think it's amazing. It's great stuff. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you for the feedback.
Well,
Thank
thank
you.
you for the opportunity to share with you where we are and what we've been
Thank you.
working on.
I appreciate your time. Thank
Oh,
you.
Thank
This is
you.
wonderful, thank you. Yes. Mhm.
Okay, we're moving on to item B, Livonia Virtual Planning for 2021-2022 with Mr. Willenberg and Mr. Green.
Good evening, President Burton and members of the Board of Education. Look forward to having a conversation this evening on our progress towards preparing for Livonia Virtual at the elementary level for the upcoming school year. As you'll recall, at the elementary level, we will be moving forward with LV planning and offering it next year to acknowledge, again, the ongoing pandemic, and also we recognize a need to study the program a little bit more detail next year to see if it's something we want to move forward with in future years. So I look forward to kind of having a conversation, going through some slides that'll be on your screen, and at the end I'll take any questions you might have. Okay? So on our next slide, let's take a look and celebrate a little bit about what we've accomplished with Livonia Virtual this year. If we go back in time, back to the summer of 2020, we created Livonia Virtual to address the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. One of our leaders on that vision was Director O'Brien, and she had a commitment and a vision to staff our Livonia Virtual with LPS teachers. That was a key decision early on, because one of our goals, as you're going to hear tonight, is to best replicate our in-person instruction. And in just a short bit of time, we staffed it with over 70 LPS teachers to serve 28% of our students. And in the fall, you can see that number, and that number held steady throughout the year at our winter election change window, where folks were able to decide if they wanted to have a change from LV to in-person or in-person to LV. We did not have to collapse any classrooms at that time, and that was another amazing feat of Livonia Virtual in that first part of the school year. So as we move forward on the next slide, you'll see that in February and April, we started having those planning meetings that we talked about a month ago, and that Mr. Willenborg and Ms. O'Brien talked about last week at the study session, where we began the planning, feedback, and design of Livonia Virtual 21-22 at the elementary level. And as we think about moving forward, and I'll get in more detail about this in a few minutes, elementary families in our district are going to have a 10-day window to elect Livonia Virtual for the 21-22 school year for their children. And sometime in August and September, like we do with in-person instruction, classroom placements for Livonia Virtual students will be opened up in Parent Connect. So that's kind of a big picture look, and now let's go into the next slide. And as our secondary friends did, show you a little comparison between LV 2021 and LV 21-22. What you'll see are some areas that are the same, and I'm going to spend a little bit more time on this slide, and you're going to see some areas that are definitely a little bit different than this year. And we have a playbook, as we've talked about through this pandemic, that we now have, and we've been able to get a lot of feedback from families, students when applicable, and obviously LV staff throughout the year. So as I go one bullet at a time, at the first bullet is this year we were able to open up 2 points of selection for LV or in-person switches. As we move forward to next year, just like in secondary, students will have one opportunity to select LV or in-person instruction. The decision will be for the entire school year. It's important to note that our default at the elementary will be we're assuming you're going to be in person. And we'll talk about that when we talk about the election window. You only will be filling it out if you're selecting Livonia Virtual for next year. So our assumption is you'll be returning to in-person unless you select Livonia Virtual for the following year. But there will be no changes at the card markings or the semester. It's a one-year commitment. And we'll talk a little bit more about how we're going to make sure families understand that prior to making that selection. The second bullet, we've kind of gotten out of the business of talking about synchronous and asynchronous. I think that's a few words that we're good with and we can put in the past. And we've moved on to talk about how our LV sessions are live or self-guided. And this is for parents and families, this language. We want to make sure that they understand the difference between the two. As you see this year, in our third bullet, the LV school day had 3 hours of live and 3 hours of asynchronous instruction, or as we say now, self-guided. And as we look into next year, we want to make sure a big message we get across to our families is the LV school day is 6 hours and 15 minutes. It includes core academic subjects, specials, and small group time. So what does that mean? You might be thinking, does that mean that they have to be in front of a computer for 6 hours and 15 minutes? It does not. It means, though, however, that our LV students have to know that they have to be available for learning all day long, whether that's in live instruction, small group instruction, teacher check-ins. If you visited LV teachers this year, you will see one thing that they are doing on a regular basis is calling students to the computer for maybe a check-in, just like you would in an in-person class, or running a few small groups, or having to give some feedback. And if the student isn't available for learning because they think, well, it's not my live session time, that kind of hurts the ability to make those adjustments to instruction or give that feedback. When we look at the fourth bullet, in-person and LV daily schedules are not matched, that remains the same. While we are going to try to replicate as much as the in-person schedule as possible, those daily time schedules will not be exact. And if you think about the 30-minute asynchronous or self-guided time, the self-guided work moving forward will be posted as needed in the Google Classroom and as a continuation of direct instruction. So, for example, a teacher may have the students for an ELA session, and they then turn them over for 15 minutes to work on some self-guided work, and that would be part of that self-guided time. And then they may call them back and give them some additional feedback and maybe send them off on their way. And all those schedules will be communicated to families at the beginning of the year, just like when you have in-person instruction at the start of the year. You have that curriculum night at the beginning of the year, that open house, and those are those times where we really work with families to help them understand and reinforce what that school day is going to look like. One of the areas this year we were able to offer at ACAT, but we were not able to offer at Niji but we've made a commitment to next year we're not going to be offering Livonia Virtual for our ACAT or Niji families. We've met with administration and staff at both of those schools as we spoke last month, and we just cannot replicate, duplicate, imitate the intent of those programs in a virtual world. Those programs were designed with specific functions and specific characteristics that just based on feedback this year, we cannot replicate for those families. So that's a graphic that will be this graphic that you will see here will be something that families that want to elect to go into Livonia Virtual would see in their application process. Now, if we look at the next page, another way we're going to make sure that we really help families understand the obligations and responsibilities of Livonia Virtual is through a compact. Folks in our Title I buildings have been using a compact for many years. And a compact, as it says up front, is a written statement of expectation for schools, families, and students. The staff, families, and students at our schools share the responsibility for improved academic achievement. This compact outlines the means by which the schools, families, and students will develop a partnership to achieve the common goal of high academic achievement for all students. And we'll zoom in just a little bit. I'm not going to read every bullet for you, but if we go to the next page, we can see that. Did someone ask me to read every one? Oh, no, you just said it looked much better. I'm sorry. So this is the first part, the family compact, and this is the responsibilities our staff will have for our Livonia Virtual students and how they will support student learning. So I'll let you look at that for a moment before we go to the next slide. And that self-guided piece, really that first bullet, providing engaging instructional strategies to meet students' needs. That self-guided piece is often about differentiation and calling kids back to work on them on certain skills or give them feedback. That's harder to do in a live session of a whole class. Just like if you could imagine in-person learning, a teacher would never do that in front of the whole class. They would call students up to their table, their kidney-shaped table, or their desk to give them that feedback. And if we look at the next zoom in, you'll see our family expectations. And this is really another way of educating our families about what Livonia Virtual is for next year. Talks about internet access, that 6-hour and 15-minute student day, and how they need to have certain characteristics of a virtual learner to be successful. One point that I will mention here on the staff and family expectations, and you'll see it also on the student expectations, we really wanted to capture that positive, genuine, supportive relationship, our character elements, as part of how we interact with each other. That is another element that is so much focus in our in-person learning that we didn't want to lose in our Livonia Virtual learning atmosphere as well. And then the final part, let's take a look at that. So what do we expect of students? Well, of course, we always want to make sure that they're ready to work and try their best, have their camera on at all times. Now, of course, there are going to be situations where that may not be possible, but those are things that teachers work out with families and students. But that is part of our expectation. And also be positive, kind, and demonstrate the LPS community with character elements. And all of that, just like in-person education, aligns to our district mission, which is to educate, challenge, and inspire every student to achieve personal success and become a confident contributor to society. So you have the LV 2021, 21-22 comparison. You have the compact that'll also be in the application process. So what will happen is parents, when they fill that out, will say, I've read the compact, and they'll have a checkbox. They'll say, I've read the comparisons between LV 21 and 22. And then this next part is a sample learning day. This is in draft form, so I want to show you the next slide, the Livonia Virtual 21-22 Sample Elementary Day. So what you see there are a few things. You see L means live, S means self-guided, and an example of some activities. So for example, from 9 to 12, thereabouts, 10 or 15 minutes on either side once we finalize those schedules to hit that 6-hour and 15-minute learning day. They may have their morning meeting, they may have their math, they may have a special during that time, they may have small group during that time. Then we're going to give them their lunch and recess at a common time, which is independent family time. And then again, the afternoon, whatever they didn't have in the morning, they'll have in the night. And again, this is just a sample to give you a flavor and really reinforce that point that a learner in the virtual world needs to be available for the entire school day. So what, again, you may be thinking, when will families know their exact schedule? They will know their exact schedule, like I said, at curriculum night, at open house. What they need to know now is their learner needs to be available for the entire school day. I mean, that is, when I was able to visit 25 or so teachers in the last week. Mr. Traub and Mr. Hiller were able to have listening sessions throughout the year, and most recently as we were preparing for these materials. And one of the overarching themes was we need to really make sure our Livonia virtual families and students know they have to be available for the entire student learning day. And if you think about that, goal is to replicate in-person instruction as much as possible. That's what we expect of our in-person learners, is we don't expect that they can have 2 hours or an hour during the day to leave class and not be engaged. So, that is really something that if LV is something at the elementary level families desire next year, and we respect that, we really need to make sure that they understand that complete learning day has to be something they're committed to. Okay. As we look at the next slide, I just want to talk a little bit about how we've gathered feedback in the various work groups this past several months that have worked on different pieces of putting this together. The compact, as you've seen, some of the themes that came out of the compact were those collective commitments that we have towards one another, to make sure that we have clear expectations of Livonia Virtual, to make sure that we're building a homeschool partnership. It's trickier in the online world. We don't necessarily maybe see the families in person as much, so really making sure that we focus on that homeschool partnership. Another workforce group worked on the schedules, that 6-hour and 15-minute student day, that live and self-guided school day. They work with Director O'Brien then also, as we look at it more from a teacher lens, talking about what are the minimum amount of minutes a week we're going to do ELA, or per day, math per day, intervention time per day. As you just heard about our integrated modules, how will that look? What is the requirement for that? So that task force and work group really was working on the schedules for next year. I had the opportunity to meet with some fantastic special area teachers, and we talked about what specials would look like next year. And they agreed unanimously that we really think we need to get out of the self-guided, formerly known as asynchronous special area work, and focus more on live specials, where we have students have a set time during the day in Livonia Virtual, where they can come for PE class, music class, art class. And some of the things, while they agree, especially for our youngest learners, that Livonia Virtual, because of the kinesthetic needs for the youngest learner, specials are not always the best fit. They do agree that they've learned this year how to integrate technology, how to be more innovative, collaborative among a special area teacher group, and have discovered new ways to reach out to their families. And then we have a communications group, which is really now going to be taking the forefront here over the next week. We're going to have a FAQ document that we'll be finalizing tomorrow with communications, and then looking at a Wednesday goal of sending an initial email out to the community to make them aware of the election window for LV. And we'll then obviously focus on our building administrators, sending those communications out in their weekly newsletters. We get a great mix when we look at, when we ask the question, where did you hear about something? We get a great mix actually from folks saying we heard about it from the district e-blasts. We heard about it, some say we heard about it on the website, so we'll make sure we post it there. And then we also hear a lot of great input we heard it from our school weekly newsletters and our teachers' newsletters. So we'll make sure that gets out from the LV teachers, because the odds are that most people that chose in-person this year are going to choose in-person next year, and that the percentage of people that want LV, will make sure those LV teachers get those out as well to their LV families. I can't thank enough, before I get to the next slide, all the feedback we received from the LV staff and stakeholders and various folks that have been involved in any way, shape, or form with Livonia Virtual this year. I have to tell you, when you go and see it in person and you see, my preferred method, I think all early folks' preferred method is in person, but putting our values judgments aside, it's amazing what our teachers are doing and our kids are doing. I'll share one story with you. I was watching a teacher teach as I was coming into her room to collect some feedback, and she was mentioning she was doing a one-on-one self-guided time with the student, and the little student said, so when I go back to work on my own now for this activity, can I put on that classical music that you told me about that would help calm me down so I don't get anxious about if the work is too hard? I mean, that was pretty powerful to see in action, and those relationships. It's the heart of Livonia Public Schools, whether it's an in-person or a Livonia virtual world. That is who we are. And again, having I don't want to say real, but real people teaching our students this year in Livonia Virtual was a masterful decision. So thank you for supporting that. As we look at the next slide, I just want to make sure that some points aren't lost on us here. I know last week we talked about how are we going to come up with how many classes. So some of the work, I have to be honest, is this is not going to be a one and done with the Board of Education here. We're going to come back and report to you as we move forward with this process. But once the election window is over, we'll have an idea of what our percent is of families that have elected Livonia Virtual for next year. I make no predictions. This year we're around 28%. My assumption, though, is that it'll be significantly less. And then based on that, our design of the program will start to take shape as far as how will we offer specials, who will be the interventionist for the Livonia Virtual students. But how we're going to staff Livonia Virtual is we'll use ratios, and this is an example, and on the left you see a first grade example, and we set a ratio of 25 to 30 students per LV class. Excuse me, that should say kindergarten, at the top. If we have 33 Livonia Virtual kindergarten applications, we would have 1 kindergarten LV class and then 3 waitlisted kindergarten students. I want to speak about the waitlist and that in a moment. If we have 56 Livonia Virtual kindergarten applications, we would have 2 kindergarten LV classrooms of 28 students. And this is twofold, to create balance in our enrollment in our Livonia Virtual classroom, so one teacher doesn't have 30 and another one has 15, but also it impacts our in-person ability to staff our students at reasonable rates too. If we go too low, that's going to negatively impact our in-person staffing. And then one of the questions also, will our local center students have the ability to apply for Livonia Virtual? And Dr. Terrill and I have worked on some ratios. If those classrooms are possible, they're only possible if we reach certain thresholds. So for example, in our ASD classrooms, a minimum of 6 students would be needed to operate an LV classroom. Again, that has to do with staffing and feasibility of being able to offer such a program. And if we have 4, we would not offer ASD LV as an option next year. If we have 8, we could open 1 ASD LV classroom. And obviously, I would work with student services on those unique registrations. So before I move on, I wanted to make sure that we talk a little bit about the wait list, because a question that has come up is, so how, if 33 kindergarten families register for Livonia Virtual, will it be the first ones that select it and it's time stamped? And I'm not recommending that. And here's why. I would hate it if a Livonia Virtual family, the window opens, they're online helping their student, they don't check their email, they're at work, they're an essential worker, they get home later that night, and then all of a sudden because they were doing other things, they missed out on an opportunity for Livonia Virtual. And so we have a great process for 105 and 105C where we have a lottery when that becomes the case. So what we'll do is we'll collect those enrollment numbers, and then if needed at different grade levels, we'll hold a lottery. And I'll definitely share those details with the board. Those details would have to be finalized, and I have a little bit of a timeline I've set forward with that, but it's a high integrity process where you basically would take those 33 students, you would randomly select them, and then however many classes, if it's one, I would draw 30 names, and then the first 3 would be waitlisted. And those waitlisted students are not enrolled in LV, they're in person. It's important to note that your selection for LV this year, moving forward, does not necessarily mean your student will be in Livonia Virtual. It'll mean if we have the ability to staff them. Now, one of the things I can tell you is that if you look at this past year, we typically find a way to figure things out, and we do it with high integrity, and I'm confident we'll be able to figure it out, but I wanted to make sure the board understood the recommended process I have for making sure that no families are feeling because I was out of town and I didn't fill out the survey to the 5th day of the 10-day window, all of a sudden I'm there on the timestamp. So, and that's why we do that process for the 105 and 105C as well. All right, as we look at the next slide, some key dates moving forward is tonight's April 19th, and I'm presenting to you about our planning for Livonia Virtual at the elementary level. We're going to do a communication blitz, as I just mentioned, over the next few days. It'll mirror our friends in secondary, how it'll have a letter and explain kind of a general overview and some hyperlinks of where they can click on different pieces of information. So all those things that are going to be in the application, they're going to be able to see ahead of time and make sure that they're making the proper selection for their child. And then April 26th to May 7th, the election window will open for Livonia Virtual. We'll again send out regular reminders. The key point, one of the key points that we're going to have to keep saying again and again and again is only complete if you want your child in Livonia Virtual for next year. And electing Livonia Virtual doesn't guarantee a spot for the following year. If necessary, in mid-May, we'll have a lottery for each grade level. And then in late May, early June, confirmation of acceptance will be sent to Livonia Virtual families. And then just like with our in-person students, late August, early September, we'll notify them of their child's teacher. So that's our timeline moving forward at this time. And, one of the other questions that was asked of the elementary secretaries when I had a chance to meet with them last week is, what are you going to do about new registration? So we have a plan in place for that, in that when students enroll in Livonia Public Schools in the summer, specifically kindergarten families, they often get what's called a kindergarten overflow letter that just brings the awareness to them that their child may be overflowed to another building if there's not space. They'll have some kind of communication like that we will put in our registration, online registration, that will indicate if they were somebody that wanted to select Livonia Virtual for the following year, they would obviously go then in order. That would be an issue. That would be a situation where you'd be then time-stamped on a wait list because we've already gone through that selection process of how many classrooms. So that's where we are with timelines, and obviously there's a lot more detail on the staff side and more details moving forward with what those numbers will look like and what they will dictate as far as next steps moving forward. And then the final slide, when you think about our key points that I've reviewed with you tonight, LV 21-22 is a year-long commitment. That's a big change. LV students need to be ready for learning the entire school day. In-person learning is our recommended mode of instruction, especially for our youngest learners. However, as we mentioned, we acknowledge that next year, as the pandemic is still here with us, we acknowledge that would probably be something that families will still seek out to some level. And we will study it next year, and we'll analyze it. We're going to have a lot of kids coming back to us from Livonia Virtual this year. And the data we gather from their experiences this year, looking at how they are as learners next year, will be important. One of the things that's not included on this slideshow that we've already committed to with our M-STEP is we will definitely be recommending that any standardized or state testing, LV students are asked to come in person to complete that. Our youngest learners, it's incredibly challenging in the Livonia Virtual world to capture exactly what they know and don't know in their iReady assessments and some of those other assessments. Our early benchmark, like guided reading assessments. There's some great tools through Literacy Footprints that they're able to use online. But for those standardized assessments, I mean, we love parental support, don't get me wrong. But we do have some data that when kids came back mid-year, their data looked a lot different than what it showed when they tested in the virtual world. So that is something that is another, when we think of a change for next year. And only families interested in Livonia Virtual should fill out the application for next year. And again, it doesn't guarantee a spot just because you fill out the application. And finally, we value the strength in the history of our magnet programs, but they will not have a LV option for next year. So we can take any questions, and if there are any.
Mr. Johnson?
Thank you, Mrs. Acosta. Bill, just a couple of questions. With regard to the wait list, if they do a lottery and you're put on the wait list, then I'm assuming you're going to in-person until perhaps a spot opens up in the LV. Is that right?
That's correct. And what would happen is there would be a cutoff sometime in the fall where we would have to, eliminate those wait lists, and they would. We don't want to create a situation where we have 6 kids on a wait list and then, they're waiting for a spot and someone moves out of LV and then they want a change in October. That's just not a practice we do in a normal school year and in person where we approve transfers in and out of classrooms. That would be highly disruptive to the teacher and to the student as well. So we would probably have a window sometime near the end of the school year where those families that are on the wait list would be communicated that at this time there are no spots and you'll be in person in these teachers' classrooms, and that will be their election for the year. It will be in person.
Okay, so what do we do if someone within that 10-day window chooses LV? Let's assume that there is no lottery at that point, and they change their mind. Is there a window during which they can pull out before the start of the school year?
Correct. There will be a window. I know that makes a little bit more work for everybody, but it's a lot less work to do it in June than it would be to do it in August. But we need to make sure that we do a great job communicating to families what they're really signing up for, because as I mentioned earlier, this is going to impact our staffing, our class sizes, and too much movement at a late date would negatively impact that. And so quite honestly, if we have established classrooms that don't have in-person room, they may be stuck with that option. So we want to definitely have a window in June sometime before we go from the summer where they've had a chance to reflect and if they've changed. Quite honestly, what we found this year is they email you ahead of time before you even open up such a window. They let you know, families will let you know that, oops, I made a mistake, I don't want Livonia Virtual, but that's something that definitely we need to think about. It will happen.
Okay, thanks, Bill, I appreciate it.
Thank you. Mrs. Bonifield?
So have we decided, you talked about kindergarten and first grade, we are going to do virtual for kindergarten and first grade?
Yep. So when we collected feedback from the teachers and from some of what they're hearing from their families, we are going to move forward offering kindergarten and first grade for next year. I think if this was not a pandemic, this would not be on the table. If there was not a pandemic in Livonia Public Schools and in our country, we would not be moving forward recommending kindergarten and first grade for Livonia Virtual due to the unique aspects of that learner. You think about when we talk in elementary terms, we always talk K1, the K1 learner, the pre-K1 learner, and there's just definitely this switch, this change in their development around second grade, and some of the tasks that we encourage and want, whether it's the gross motor, fine motor development, our teachers get really creative, and I cannot compliment them enough of how they're trying to build that bridge. But it would not be something that we probably want to get in the business of offering post-pandemic at the K1 level. I struggle personally with the very first interaction that we have with new families is in a virtual world, but I'm a big relationship-based kind of guy that likes to see them and meet them, and so I have to check myself there. But when we talk to the special area teachers, one of our music teachers on the committee talked about how when a young student tries to find their voice, that is very hard to do in the virtual world, and there's certain benchmarks kinesthetically with physical education But we also know that our teachers are working on socialization experiences and other things moving forward for next year in our planning. But if there was no pandemic, the recommendation would not be to offer it at K-1.
Okay, and so, as you say that, 1 year, people start expecting things. 2 years, it becomes a human right at that point. So can we, I'm concerned that we're gonna get into a situation where it's less about the pandemic and more about, something that we are going to do, and that after the pandemic, we're taking things away. And I don't know, communicating maybe that, kindergarten and first grade is still, based on the fact that it's a pandemic. I agree. I know we talked a little bit about whether or not we would have the K-1, and I definitely struggle with that. But if it means that, if that's a need for next year,
Yeah.
still based on the pandemic, then, it's something that we're going to need to do.
No, I agree with you, and I think, that second bullet point of why we're offering Livonia virtual for next year is not only because of the ongoing pandemic, but also is to study and analyze its effectiveness and long-term sustainability. I think those are parts of continuous conversations with the board and communications to the community that, we really don't feel post-pandemic K-1 that we want to be in the business of, offering a virtual education for those age levels.
And
And I'm going to add to that just for a moment, because we're really going to be studying that across the board, not just at K-1. So we're really going to be trying to determine viability K through 12.
okay.
Do we want to continue to devote our resources and our efforts to a virtual program in the long term? So there will be a determination by level, as well as individual grade levels. And so I don't think we can emphasize that enough, that this is not a long-term guaranteed offering for Livonia Public Schools. We really want to see Livonia virtual in the light of day post-pandemic and determine whether or not we are able to confidently say that we believe we can have the equitable learning opportunities for students in this environment as we can in person. And so we know that there are options for families elsewhere for virtual programming. The thing that makes Livonia so unique is that it is not fully asynchronous and self-guided. We have not only teachers teaching live instruction throughout the day, but we have our own teachers doing that, utilizing our own curriculum. But that will be evaluated throughout next year with feedback from students and families and staff. And so we'll not only be looking at the early L learner, but really across the board, is Livonia Public Schools interested in continuing to offer a virtual option in perpetuity? So next year is really almost like a reboot of year one, and taking a look at it as at all levels, not just elementary.
And I had one other question. So, you said that if parents change their mind, we've got the 10-day window, they've changed their mind, they're able to pull out of the Livonia virtual. Is it clear that the opposite is not true? That if they decide after the 10-day window is closed, that they now decide that they made a mistake and they want to go to Livonia virtual? But that's not a two-way street, correct?
Yeah, we're really, again, our reason at the elementary, and it kind of piggybacks what Superintendent Oquist was saying, is we're defaulting to in-person. So we're not going to open up windows for folks that wanted in-person, then all of a sudden it's June and are switching to LV. It's really giving folks that have selected LV an option to return to in-person. Because that is our recommended, for the earliest learner, preferred method of instruction and learning.
But during the application process, that's going to be very clear.
Yep.
If you do not choose Livonia virtual during this time period, the window is closed.
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you. Mrs. Bradford?
Thank you, Mrs. Acosta. Mr. Green, what will be happening with siblings? Let's say there's several siblings in a family that want LV. Would it be, and obviously they're probably choosing LV because they want to, stay home and kind of lay low during the pandemic. Is it possible there could be some students that, in a family that some may be in LV and some may have to be in person?
That's definitely one of the trickier pieces. So kind of to think about what we do in our 105, 105C process that I referenced earlier. If you have a sibling who's already been selected in previous years in 105, 105C, siblings get preference in their applications. However, in the 105, 105C, if Mr. Green puts in his 2 children and applies, one of them at one grade may get in, and another one may be on a wait list. And that's an unfortunate situation. It doesn't happen a lot, but it really is it's unfair if I'm using a lottery to give sibling preference. That's just my viewpoint. I think we need to, again, I predict it'll work out, but, because we tend to get families that are doing the same thing. So like if they have a sibling, those are going to be the repeat customers next year that they're real passionate about returning to Livonia Virtual. I can get you some information about if we're talking how many siblings. I can have Mr. Hillard look that up for me. But yeah, that's going to be a tough one that we'll have to cross when we get there.
Yeah, I think that's difficult. Again, a family is mostly choosing because they're concerned about their health and safety, so.
So I can share with you, I'm sorry, what we've done this year. So we've had some requests at various times to return, at the election window. And if there wasn't space for a student, one sibling has gone and another hasn't. And that's been unfortunate. Where we've trumped that is where it's been a documented health reason why they've wanted to go into Livonia Virtual, and that's kind of gone to the front of the line.
Okay, thank you.
And the other thing I would say is that, again, just to reiterate, because I don't think we can probably say this enough, it will be based on the ratio. So if, for instance, there is a grade level where only 8 students have indicated across the entire district, we would not be running it at that grade level. And so one of the reasons, both for budgetary reasons as well as to be able to keep our staffing intact at the in-person level, we need to run Livonia virtual classes at similar sizes. And so that could be a possibility that there may be a grade level that would not run because there is not enough interest. I don't think that will be the case, but I just want to make sure that we're getting out all these possibilities so the board can consider that and ask those questions.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you. President Burton?
Yes, I have a few points. I think you've hit them clearly. I just want to reiterate them to make certain that the public gets it and there's no confusion. If a family is to choose Livonia Virtual, that is a year-long decision.
Correct.
They will not have the option at semester break to make a switch.
That is correct. It's a year-long commitment.
Okay. The decision is being publicized starting, or the window is being publicized starting now, and that window will open shortly in the next few days.
It will open up,
And-
over the weekend or Monday at the latest.
Okay, and it will be closed by May 7th.
Correct.
So we have almost a 3-week-long window to be considering it before a final decision is needed.
Correct.
Okay. We are assuming our students at the elementary level are going in person unless they tell us otherwise. So if a family wants their child to be in person at Livonia Public Schools and they're in the district today, if they want in person, they can do nothing. And it is assumed that their child will be coming back in person next year.
Correct.
We only need action from them if they are choosing to go virtual, regardless of what they've been this year. If
That's
they're
correct.
in person this year, or if they're virtual this year. If they want virtual next year, that's the only time that we need to hear from them.
That's correct. And on the application, as we were designing it, it says stop. And there's all sorts of verbiage on there. A lot of warning signs. And are you sure? And yep, they don't have to do anything unless they want Livonia Virtual next year. Because when we look at our roll up and our MyStar enrollment, everybody right now is rolled up next year as if they were an in-person student.
Okay. And I imagine, I mean, I agree with you that similar to what the numbers that we're seeing at the secondary level, I imagine the vast majority of our students are going to be choosing to come back in person, regardless of their decision this year, but.
Yep,
but only if
that's
they-
kind of what the teachers are actually saying when I visit them too. You know, if you, it mirrors very similar to the secondary numbers, quite honestly, when I've, when I've met with teachers, because they have conversations with families and students as applicable.
Yep. For what it's worth, that's what I'm finding anecdotally also in chatting with families who are in both situations right now. Wow. Okay. Let me see here. This is something that you and I talked about a few days ago. That, and I'm just going to reiterate what you said again. The self-guided time really is self-guided, but expected that the student be actively involved in their schoolwork, as opposed to it's not a 20-minute window where you can run up to Kroger and run back and get back in time for the live class session again.
That is correct. Or play an Xbox game, or, you know, watch an episode of your favorite TV show. These are things that we would all be tempted to do, right? If we were living in that environment. I have students in my own home that have had online learning in college, and you see it from that lens. And so when I've seen it work in the classrooms I visited, those students are still on the screen, actually, and they're in their little workspace in their office, and they know when they're going to need to get called back to the teacher or when their next little small group time is. So yes, and quite honestly, it's pupil accounting, the rules, that it's a full day of school.
Right. And that too is a good point to be made. That's where this year differs from next year. The number of minutes and how they're counted is different, and that's one of the main reasons, or one of a main reason that Livonia Virtual is going to look different this year than it will next year.
Correct.
Okay. If we come upon, and thank God it is rare that we have a child with a severe medical situation, but if we do come upon a child with a severe medical situation that causes their decision to be different, that is something that they need to come to either you, or if they're a secondary student, to Mr. Willenborg about, and that will be handled on a case-by-case basis.
Correct. You know, right now, we've done that this year. So typically, if we were looking at an LV student that needed to go back in person, sometimes what happens in our child study teams in our buildings, they may meet with the parents, and they're not seeing the progress they need, and that sometimes is a recommendation that comes out of that child study team, and typically that's in partnership with the parent. Conversely, we've had, unfortunately, some students that have had some medical issues this year who were in person, and we make those adjustments as well on a case-by-case, yes.
Okay. And thankfully, that severe of a health situation with any of our children is rare. It's not to be used as a backup if you change your mind, but it truly is available
Correct.
for the student who has a true medical situation going on.
That
So
is correct.
I don't want folks to think that we are completely heartless on situations like that, though, but those are handled on a case-by-case basis.
That is correct, yeah.
Okay. And again, that the Livonia virtual class will take place only if there are enough students that sign up for it. Like any other class that we would run, if we don't have enough students for it, for example, an elective course at a secondary level, we can't run a section for 4 students.
Correct, and those ratios will be fully transparent in the application process, so, you know, we'll make sure that those are clearly stated.
Okay. Thank you very much to the entire team for doing so much work that is so thorough, and presenting this information as clearly as possible to parents so they can make a really informed decision.
Thank you.
Mrs. Bonnefield?
Right. Mrs. Burton made me think of, we've talked about Livonia Virtual is like another building right there in school. So if you're at Hoover, next year you're going to, usually you're going to Hoover. So for the parents who maybe think, oh, my child is in LV this year, then I'm automatically assuming that because I was LV this year, I'm staying in the same building. So I'm not going to read any of the paperwork because I know my kid's already enrolled in LV and I don't have to do anything. Are we covering that situation?
Yep, so Is that, I think it's a two-part question, so are you asking, so the statistics show this year that we're able at the elementary to have, for example, if you looked at Roosevelt Elementary, in all of our K-4s, a kindergarten, first, second, third, and fourth grade LV classroom in each of those K-4 buildings.
Yeah.
If we follow the trend line of our prediction of how many will enroll in LV next year, that won't be the case.
Well, so that wasn't necessarily where I was going, but that my concern is that we're saying all the students are face-to-face unless they opt for LV. What about the parent who assumes, because their student's already LV, that they're not gonna read any of the paperwork or the documentation, because they know that their student is already enrolled in LV, because it's gonna carry over?
So we'll get those communications out. I'm going to give you an honest answer and then a little bit of an answer that kind of aligns to the compact. So we're gonna advertise it via the school. We're gonna advertise it via the LV teacher. But if we think about our compact and what it said there is that families, we have to count on you for certain things, and that's probably not a great candidate to be in Livonia Virtual then, as a family.
Thank you. I think what you were thinking is that for secondary, they had to make a definite selection, so you kind of covered all the bases that way.
Yep. Great questions.
Right.
Thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over to my partner, Mr. Willenboer, to give you an update on LV at the secondary level.
Thank you, Mr. Costa. I did, as we did last week, I gave you a running total of our secondary numbers that have enrolled in LV, and is hopefully included in your packet, is that update through today's date, April 19. And 92% of our 92.5% of our respondents have opted for in-person instruction. 7.5% of our respondents have selected Livonia Virtual. Last week, we were at 85% total respondents. Through some tremendous and diligent work of our secretaries, our administrators, our counselors, we now have, these numbers represent 97.8% of our secondary population. So we feel we're in a good spot, and next week, with the scheduling assistant principals and principals at the middle school, we'll start, looking at class tallies, confirming and formalizing our offerings, and developing our schedules and matching those to teachers. So I think we're in a good spot, and that's where we are on the secondary level.
Thank you. President Burton?
Yes, this is along the lines of looking forward and looking back. I had a conversation with a young lady who is a graduate of Stevenson last year. She's one of our 2020 Stevenson grads. And she was just wanting it to be known again that the class of 2020 still feels a sense of loss over some significant events, and we can guess what they are: prom and graduation. And she said she was not looking for anything to be changed at this point, because we had some back and forth conversation about it, but she said, I just need for the board and the administration to just acknowledge that that was a loss for us, which I believe that we did at the time, but it is important to acknowledge that loss exists, and that for some of those folks, they've gone on and put that behind them, but for a number of our 2020 grads, they're still experiencing that loss. And I think it's the approaching of the next prom and graduation season that kind of brought that feeling back up again. But I did assure her that since I'm acknowledging on both of our parts that we cannot do anything to change what happened in the height of the pandemic as we were beginning to know what was going on with it, and acknowledging a whole lot of things that were done to try to replace some of those activities. But I just told her that yes, we will acknowledge that and bring that up again, and recognize for the folks in our own lives that are in that graduating class or that may have experienced other significant losses over this past year, that it's important to still acknowledge those. And whether they are with our graduating seniors from last year or folks at other stages of their life, what some of the things that they may have lost. But as excited as we are to look forward and go from here, and as proud as we are of a lot of the things that we were able to put together over this past 15 months, and I'm immensely proud of what our district has done. I think it is important, and I gave this young lady my word that I would make sure that we did acknowledge that there are some things that our students have lost that cannot be replaced or redone. So I encourage myself and the rest of our folks to make sure that we keep that in the back of our mind as we come upon some of our folks who have had some significant losses that simply can't be redone.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions for, okay.
On a much brighter note, I'm thrilled beyond belief that we've got 95 or 97% of our respondents back. On a much lighter note, and thank you to the team of folks that I'm certain that was. That's not one or two people's efforts, but to have 97% of our responses in at secondary, and to be able to really make some informed decisions. And I'm also excited to see 92% of our students choosing to come back in person. As many folks believe, I acknowledge that Livonia Virtual is necessary and important for some families, but I absolutely love having students in front of our teachers again. And to the extent that we can do that, and that families feel comfortable and safe doing that again, I'm thrilled. So I think we're finally making, to me, this is healthy steps out of the pandemic back into normal life again.
Certainly represents a lot of phone calls, but
Oh, yeah.
by our secretaries and administrators and counselors. But again, a big thank you to our parent community who put up with a lot of confusing forms and a lot of effort and questions, to make a decision.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to item 3C.
Just a
Oh, I'm
quick
sorry,
question.
go
Will
ahead.
this be this is information only, or will we bringing this up at the regular meeting?
I will include it as part of my district update, just a quick review that the information is out and that we are in the window. We had not planned to do this presentation again unless the
Okay.
board would like us to do so.
No, just for clarification. Thanks.
Thank you. We'll move on to item 3C, Adult Education Grant Purchase, presented by Mr. Willenborg.
Thank you, Ms. Acosta. As I shared last week at the study session, a reallocation of unclaimed adult education funding was offered to school districts that offer adult education by the state of Michigan. Karen Ling, our supervisor of adult ed, made application on behalf of the Livonia Public Schools for those additional funds, and we were awarded $174,000 for our program. After thorough analysis with our IT department, the decision was made to focus those funds on the upgrade of technology hardware and other instructional resources to benefit the students and the staff of the LPS Adult Education Program. So highlights of that program include Surface Pro and Surface Go personal devices. There's 108 for the students, there's 21 for staff and other members, as well as interactive Promethean whiteboards, which are the interactive boards, and virtual reality glasses. A detailed quote is provided in your attachment. The funding for this purchase is made clear, not from the general fund. Funding is provided through the State School Act, Section 107, grant of 2021. These products were reviewed through REMC pricing, and CDWG was the selected provider. So the final quote, the total quote from CDWG is $157,164. And again, that breakdown of that quote is in your packet. I'm requesting that this item be placed on the agenda for next week's voting meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Willenborg. Any questions? Mrs.
Thank
Bradford?
you, Mrs. Acosta. I just wanted to thank Karen Ling for applying for that grant because, You know, adult ed is, they need lots of equipment and devices also, and it's such an important part for our community to run these programs. So for her to go out and put forth this grant, I think is great for this group of adults, and I think it will be so beneficial. So really appreciate her taking the time to do that.
She's very excited at the prospect of upgrading the
Yeah, that's
technology needs in
Just
that
great
program.
news. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Thank you, Mr. Willenborg.
Thank you.
And that sums up item 3.
Thank you. We are on to item 4, Building and Site Committee, and I will turn it over to Mr. Centers.
Sure. We have 2 items this evening. The first item is item 4A, roofing design and construction services firm. Mr. Francis is joining us.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Let's hope I don't need that. Brian, just a quick tap on that. It should go on. Yeah. Good evening, everybody.
Hi
Good
there.
Brian Weber, Plant Moran Cressa Owners Rep, is joining us this evening for this one item on 4A, roofing design and construction services firm. As discussed very briefly at the study session last Monday, the roofing design and construction services firm is a professional service that we use, that we have been using, Roofing Technology Associates, also known as RTA, over the past several years since we've begun the sinking fund planned projects of re-roofing buildings throughout the district. Each time that we have them do an additional design, we bring that contract back to the board with what those fees will be. And included in your packet is a letter from Plant Moran Cressa, Owners Rep, as well as a letter and some details from RTA on what exactly the scope of their work would be, as well as their fees, which their percentage has maintained at 2.8%, which is a very good number in the industry, and it is held over the years that we've been doing this with them. And you'll also note that not only is it design, but also project management or construction services. That's that portion in the agenda, is once the work actually occurs during the summer months, RTA is the representative of Livonia Public Schools in managing. They are essentially the architect of the project, so they are ensuring that whichever roofing company is doing the work, they ensure that they're following the design as planned out and agreed upon by LPS. So that's some brief background. Your packet had also, on top of those 2 letters, those heat maps of the locations that we're looking to design. And those designs are a portion of Stevenson High School roof, a portion of Franklin High School roof, Garfield Community School roof, and we're going to make note on a piece that it looks really funky because there's only little dashes of red. We'll explain why that is. That's actually the entire roof that needs to be done, believe it or not, but we'll explain it. And when you see it in person, you look at it and you say, oh yeah, that makes sense. And then the final one was a Grant Elementary design. So those are the items that are in the packet. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Weber for a couple minutes here, let him run through those roofs and some information on this topic.
Thank you, Mr. Francis. Skipping through the heat maps, starting with, looks like we have Stevenson High School. So this heat map is based on a study from 2017 that RTA was hired to walk the roofs, assess conditions of each area of the schools. We've taken it in a color coding to kind of ease of understanding of where our problem areas could be based on age, assign the colors to it. These maps were actually updated in the last month, not based on an updated walk, but just to kind of run it out through the time to better forecast, so we're not looking at data from 2017. So that kicked some of these areas into a yellow orange up into the red or the purple, which is in the failed or very poor stages. So that's the information you're looking at right now for each one of these heat maps. We had met with the LPS team, facilities and maintenance, so we used a combined effort of the 2017 data, also looking at maintenance data where we've had a lot of calls for leaks or maintenance that's been costing the district money over the last few years. Combine that data to establish what areas of each of these buildings we'd want to attack. And then also combining that with the logistics, a thought process of how these contractors can get in the building or around the building without having to potentially walk back over if we have to go back in a year or two to hit the same building, not walking over a brand new roof we just put in. And then combine that with, to the level of, if we can't do the whole building because of the square footage, we want to avoid going on a same roof-to-roof connection, we'll call it, because it just leads to leaks. So we look for areas that were breaks in the roof, whether it's a wall or an end section that is an easy termination for the contractor that won't lead to more problems for the district in the meantime before we can get back to the areas of roof we cannot address this year.
And on that spot specific for Stevenson, and you'll see it again with Franklin, RTA had done a little cross hatching to show that the areas that we're looking at for them to design.
Correct.
On the Stevenson one, does that include the purple?
It does. So on this map, we are addressing all red and purple at Stevenson.
It doesn't help that I have a black and white version, does it? No, I know, mine is. I did a photocopy of it.
Okay, because I think I initially read that as the purple was not being done because the arrows went to each of the red, so.
No, anything cross-hatched, it was just an example of, look, these little spots that look like this with the hatching is what will be designed.
It was my hatching and arrow, so I'll take the blame on that one. Yeah, so it is, so sticking to Stevenson, yes, correct, all red and purple is being addressed or proposed for the summer. In just one other note, we also considered size of project. These two high schools, so it would be Stevenson and Franklin. We know that the contractors can only address so much in the summer. We only have select contractors that can deal with projects this size when they get to this level of area, so we didn't want to make it too large of a project either for the contractors we've had regular experience with. So that was also kept in mind as we were trying to understand which buildings need to be addressed first. So any questions for Stevenson for hatching? Moving on to Franklin. So Franklin's a little bit different footprint. There are some red areas on this footprint that are not hatched. Once again, based on square footages and logistics of the areas, we had to limit it. Also leaning on facilities in the maintenance department to understand, okay, these areas are red, or you having issues, and we were able to address that. We prioritize the areas that were giving them more trouble than the others.
We also, if you notice that, if you can recall the footprint, we really are going after classroom roofs over classrooms versus roofs over perhaps gyms or other areas. So that's the priority. When we had to choose square footage, that's what we chose.
And then one special note for Franklin, there are some gray areas, just to show you that in 2018, we did address a couple areas on the north and east side of the building there. So those were reflected just to show that this is not the first time we're addressing the building in this program, just based on need.
We had a question.
Just real quick, there are a couple small areas that are kind of adjacent to areas that look like they're being done that are purple. Are those going to wait a year, or?
Yeah, we're probably going to be at high schools in 3 different summers. That's what, and for Franklin, if we can do the rest of it in one, we can, because parts of it have been done. But we're really trying to get over those classrooms, the worst parts over classrooms, and also basing it upon the locations of the work orders of leaks that have occurred at the buildings.
Okay, so it being purple doesn't.
It's not a guarantee yeah, because again, if you look at the original, it wasn't purple. We've just time-lapsed it to say, well, if you were red, we're going to make you purple, but we don't want to just do that and make our decision. We did that for some visual effect, but the real decision was based upon work orders, based upon leaks in roofs, based upon experience of our maintenance team, and also trying to go after roofs over classrooms, over roofs covering other areas.
Okay. Sounds good.
Okay. Moving on to next one is the one Phil warned you about, was Garfield. So this is an atypical building in the district. As you can see, not every area is touched. It is 100% of the rubber membrane roofing systems on the building. The portions that are not highlighted are a peaked metal roof system that are not in need of repair right now. So we are addressing all rubber membrane flat roof areas in this project, which is roughly 25 to 30% of the building.
It's Garfield's a large, well, when it was a K-6 and then a K-4, it's one of our larger elementary buildings, but when you look at the roof, there's not a lot of square footage there. But the second you look at either a satellite overhead or you just go to the building, you recognize immediately that's what's happening. They're the high point peaks and metal portions versus all the items being done are those low area membranes.
So I know those metal roofs have a little bit longer life to them. Do we have any sense of how much longer life is on those metal roofs?
According to the RTA, and I don't have his in front of me, but we don't have any intention of replacing those in the next.
No, it hasn't been on any.
In the next 6-7 years in this project.
Right.
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 Yeah.
Okay. Any more questions for Garfield? And then the last one is Grant.
Brian?
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry. On Garfield, there's no cross-hatching, so does that mean that everything that's red or purple will
Correct.
get that?
That is correct. Everything that's colored will be addressed.
And Ms. Jarvis, you might hear me say or write in a memo or Plant Moran that it's a total roof. That's the juxtaposition of looking at it. It's not really the total roof, it's the total rubber membrane on the roof that we're gonna replace. So we're gonna refer to it as a total roof replacement. In fact, it's not, all the metal portions aren't, it's the total roof replacement of all rubber membranes.
Thank you.
Okay, onto the last map is for Grant. And this is a complete project replacement. This one will be addressed in whole over the summer, so that'll be a separate project as well.
With regard to cost, it's based upon the percentage that RTA has been continuing to hold, as I'd mentioned, and then is working off of a $16 a square foot estimate that we use for the budgetary purposes. So their rate is based upon a budget of $6,131,744 that we're estimating for these particular roofs. There's a 10% variance if it's higher or lower, if the cost of work runs more than 10% below or more than 10% above, then there becomes an adjustment. So we basically use the budgetary number, which is how we've been running those contracts each year.
Any questions, comments? I just want more. And Grant, there looks like there's like these square pods. Are those traditional membrane roofs or are they something different?
The membrane, I believe they have peaks to them, if I
Got it.
remember
I think
correctly.
that's denoting an elevation of a change in
Okay,
elevation.
great.
And so we'll bring this to the board for a voting meeting next week. And again, this is not on any bids, not on any project. It is only for the design services of RTA. Okay? And also, just to clarify, our intention would be for these to potentially be summer 2022 projects, but we know having 4 different, and we always bid them as separate items. If the budgets are out of whack, if there's a spike or numbers don't come in well, we'll have the ability to hold off if we're going over budget in a particular year. That's the beauty of having them all designed. That design's not gonna change if we wait a year to actually have the roof done. So we're gonna have that work done now and have it in our pocket, and hopefully we can do them in 22, and if we have to push something to 23, that'll be okay too.
Last one point I have, by doing this timing now, the goal would be to get the design done and then early fall, November timeframe like we did last year to get the bid documents out. We found that's the best time, best pricing, availability for contractors, especially for the 2 larger schools. We want to make sure we get out there sooner to get on their books or have availability to address those larger projects. So we're on good pace to achieve that.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
That brings us to item B, which is central office furniture purchase.
Yeah, and I think Mrs. Smith, I could try to kill some time here to I think she's getting
Thanks, Brian.
the presentation up. No, oh, here we go. We've got the quotes. We spoke at the study session about the furniture purchase for the renovation of the central office administration building. We just today had our final meeting just to have the check-in with Interior Environments on the items, the finishes, et cetera. So you're having the quote now handed out to you. Allison is going to run everyone through a presentation. You're all set with it?
Yep.
A presentation of the finishes, give you a little bit more background, give the community more background if this might be the first time they're hearing about it. I know that you have a couple of different occasions. We've had discussions about the fact that construction on this building is only one aspect. We have to then fill the entirety of the building with furniture. So furniture, for those listening at home, isn't just a chair, it's or a couch. It's actually almost every single item inside the building that isn't actually piped in, electrical wiring, or hard construction itself. So all of the desks, all of the chairs, all of the file cabinets, on and on and on, is every piece of that is considered furniture. So you'll see that in the quote, and then Mrs. Smith will run through, give some more background, and if there's questions, we'll go through it.
Yep, thank you very much. I'm sorry, we're having a little bit of technical issues, but hopefully you can see the pictures all right. We'll make sure that you get these and we can print them off for you. So I wanted to start off with just a little bit of background for this folks watching from home. I know the board is very familiar with the operations that take place here in this building, but we've got a number of departments from the HR, finance, student services, academic services, secondary office, elementary office, communications, IT. So in total, we have about 69 employees that work out of this office. In addition to the employees that work here every day, we've got visitors in the form of our staff that come here for professional development. This is also where families come to register. It's also where we welcome new staff for new employee orientation. This is where they come and pick up their packets and turn in information to us. So kind of a first glance at Livonia Public Schools for our community, for teachers, other staff that come and visit. So that's just a little bit of background. We also have a few pictures to show. Again, I know you're very familiar with our building, but for those folks at home, I almost forgot. Our goals for the renovation project. So it was to create welcoming spaces, to increase energy efficiency, improve temperature control, establish acoustic privacy, utilize the space more efficiently, and provide additional collaboration spaces. And we're so excited to share with you these goals that we've been able to accomplish. We found a lot of wonderful furniture solutions that are going to give us those collaboration spaces that can be utilized by all the different departments. The next slide we'll see is what our current lobby is. We did a stand, one is like the I believe it was in the 80s, 86, and what it looks like today, and you can see the same wood paneling. I think carpet has been updated since then, but definitely we have gotten our use out of that carpet and these wood walls. On the next page, we can see the superintendent's office. You can see nothing structurally has changed there. A few filing cabinets have moved, but again, largely the same. On our next slide, I believe is academic services office. No changes there. You can see. And then the next, I think, might be our conference room. I will point out we, within the last 5 years, did get new tables for the conference room, and we do plan to reuse that furniture, and we've incorporated that into the new designs. And then we've got one last look back, just a restroom, just to show you too. Nothing has changed in there. So if we keep moving on, we'll show you, this was a rendering done by the architects to show you what the lobby could look like. So if you remember what it looks like today and what it can look like, this is what folks will see as they're walking in. And so it was fun teaming with Interior Environments to put this vision then into reality and pick furniture to fill this space. So we'll see that. On the next page, we're also going to see the rendering that the architect put together for the business office suite. And you can see in here, there really is no millwork, nothing built into the space, so it's all furniture that's going to be filling that space. So we've got a few pages for you of the furniture that we have picked. This is one last just reminder of the finishes that we've selected. So these are things like the carpeting and the cabinets and stair treads and some paint samples of what will go into the space. So Interior Environments, the company we've partnered up with for the furniture, had these all at their ready so that when they were making recommendation to us, they took this into consideration. I will mention, yes, thank you. And these are all based on our book of standards that was put together in the district before we started the bond. I will also mention Interior Environments is a company that we worked with numerous times throughout the 2013 bond in each one of our buildings. A lot of flexible furniture was purchased through Interior Environments. This purchase would be coming through a national cooperative purchasing agreement. And so here we've got for you a couple pictures of the reception lobby area. You can see some high back chairs. We have a number of employees that stop in to fill out paperwork. So it's nice, these high back chairs offer some privacy while they're filling out paperwork, and they've got little laptop tables so they can fill out things. Also a nice table, so that can be used as a collaboration space or also a meeting space for people that are coming in and waiting for a meeting. We also have a couple different couches in there.
And it wouldn't be uncommon for parents and families to come in as well and fill out registration paperwork or be waiting for a meeting, whether it be with student services, academic services, secondary, et cetera, et cetera. So that's all a good usable space for both staff and community.
Yep. I will mention too, the renderings don't do the fabrics justice. So we are happy we brought back samples, so we'll have those here at the office. So if you'd like to see any of those, we'll have those ready to share with you. On the next page, you can see just the start of some of the workstations. So this is kind of the standard workstation. This is a picture of the business suite, what it'll be set up as. And on the next slide, we have the IT area. And something we're really excited about is that all of these desks are going to be sit-stand desks. So it's nice to offer employees that opportunity to be flexible throughout their day. So encouraging good health, good posture, all of that. You know, I have found for myself even having a sit-stand desk, even if you don't want to stand throughout the day, the fact that they're adjustable height can be very helpful for your wrist so that you can make it comfortable for you. And so we're very excited that we've been able to incorporate that in the spaces. You'll see in the front of this grouping of workstations is a welcoming kind of person who will be sitting there so that as people enter the space, you know, you've got a person to stop to ask, you know, where to go, that type of thing. We'll see that too on the next slide is another, I'll say a welcoming person. This isn't a new position, but somebody that would man this desk. So you'll find this as you enter the HR office on the first floor, as you're entering the business office, as well as the top of the second floor. You know, that's one thing we've had throughout the years, like if a visitor comes and they go upstairs, there really is no wayfinding, so people don't know where to go. So we thought that would be important, not only to do signage to help guide people, but also to have somebody there that can point people in the right direction, and again, be a welcoming face.
And again, these are from existing staff.
Yes. Yep.
Right. Now, in one of the items, all of the workstations, and all of them may look slightly different, but they all do encompass storage for the person. There's file storage. There's, for most of them, even a wardrobe, the tall item to the right, so they can put your jacket in there. All of them are lockable, so folks will have a place to secure their belongings, whether it be a purse or just whatever personal items, et cetera. So those are all personal storage, work storage, as well as you know, lockability and security. And
it's nice as we continue on too, you can see another one of the workstations. These will be primarily found up on the second floor. So again, we wanted to offer privacy for the folks that were working there, but also have a little bit of a lower panel so that as people approach them, they can see, you know, somebody there, and then the person sitting there can see somebody approaching again in the hopes of being welcoming. And so that is this one. If we go on, this is a look at what a standard private office will look like, this L-shaped desk. And again, this desk will have that sit-stand capability. And as Phil mentioned, this too also has a wardrobe so you can hang, you know, your things in there, has lockable drawers. One really neat thing that IE proposed and we really liked was the coordination between the workstations and the private offices. So in here you can see it's a white top desk, and then with a wood grain finish, and then in the workstations, you'll see the opposite. So you'll see the wood grain on the top of the desk, and then the white in the storage units. So kind of a nice play on each other.
The laminates that get used and the materials that get used, there's so many matching patterns, and the companies do the different lines, so it's fairly easy to match them up in those different laminates, et cetera.
Yep. Next up, you can see, look at the director private offices. These will be consistent for everyone. And again, this will have the sit-stand capability, but in an enclosed desk look. So we're excited with how that turned out. On the next slide, you can see what the superintendent's office will look like. Again, same look, just a little different finish. And then if we keep going, this was, as we start in here, some of these different collaboration spaces. So really neat concept, the idea of mixing your filing island with the open collaboration filing. So the filing island with your open collaboration space, so a table that could sit 4 folks. So this will be outside of the student services area as well as the academic services area. So kind of a neat play.
Yeah, all of the filing that we have throughout is generally like 3-drawer, like standard high top height, so it can double not only as a workspace, so if you're pulling something out of the file cabinet or putting something in, you can stack above or lay out, but additionally, folks can, whether they be the picture on the right that has the seating, or simply standing next to it and having a brief discussion, or just finding a space. So there's going to be more opportunities in the building as it will be reconfigured to have meetings, quick collaborations, sitting down and doing some work on your own if you want, in what you would traditionally think of as out in the hallway, but it's more of an open concept. So you don't need to be in a private room with a closed door. You might just have a conversation, and we find ourselves standing in the hall talking to each other all the time now. Well, we would have a place if we wanted to kind of move on up over to and have a flat surface for ourselves if we had a brief discussion outside. So much more of an open concept, much more of a collaborative atmosphere of using the furniture both for storage as well as for working at.
Mm-hmm. We can see as we continue on another look. Again, I didn't include pictures of all of the spaces. This was one of the popular tables that we kind of fell in love with. It comes in both a standing height as well as a sitting height, and it offers power underneath the tabletop. So, so many of us with our laptops now, so the ability to plug in your laptop and work from there, and also, again, offering that flexibility if you'd like to stand or if you'd like to sit, that you have both of those options. So this one in particular is a hoteling station we're looking at. So we've got coaches in the academic services area that don't currently have a space. So they're primarily, out in the buildings, but then they do come and work from central office on Fridays and normally looking for a space. And so now they'll have a home, somewhere that they can come, and it's a designated space. And what's so nice about it too, it's not only for that. The idea that if it's open on a Monday and another group wants to sit there, that it's open. So, again,
it's not somebody's. It's not, I'm going to leave my bag here. It is simply to jump into. We find student services employees who end up here, have to make phone calls to parents, or simply just sit and work for a while, or there might be some PD. They stick around after or come in before to get some work done with regard to that. I've seen principals come here for a meeting and need a spot to just take a few minutes, catch up on some emails from the building or anything that's occurring. So these hoteling spaces are going to be, and it's a very common item now in business offices where folks, while we don't have multiple different offices in different cities, we do have multiple buildings in our district. So if someone comes here from another building, they don't feel like they're completely out of sorts and don't have anywhere to go. They can grab one of the hoteling spots and do a little work.
Let's see another area that we thought turned out really well. This is going to be in the future student services area. So if you're familiar with their space that they're in now, they're in an open office, and that's worked really well for them. And one of the things that we were able to garner through this new furniture is, again, more collaboration space. So instead of just the desks in the room, now they not only have the desks, but then they have these tables and side chairs that they can meet at. So we're very excited to see that space come to life. I think if we go on, we have another example again. We didn't, I didn't include pictures of everything, but I'd be happy to share that with the board if you'd like to see each room. But this was something that we've discovered through the purchase of the current tables that we have in Conference Room A. We found that we get a lot of use out of these mobile tables. So you can put them all together, so you can form a more traditional conference room table, but that you have that flexibility to pull them apart and use them as you need them in a space. So we liked those, and so we wanted
You
to
don't have to
see
travel to
those.
Rene to see them. I'm sitting in one, so is she,
Yeah.
and so is Ms. Zilquist. This table right here, actually, I took out of A, which is up on the second floor, flipped up the top, kicked open the wheels, and, unlocked them, wheeled it down to the elevator, brought it down, came right through here and set it up, and afterwards, I'll take it right back up again. It's really nice. We can move them over to the side here for a different table, or for a different configuration. We have them in the collaboration room. These have been very, very useful.
So again, one of our favorite tables, just from another space. Again, what's nice about this table too is it came in various lengths. So we've got tables as small as seating 4, I think, in the business office, they go up to 8 is the hoteling station. And I think this is one that we're seeing again that would be for 8 folks. So. And again, some more soft seating up on the second floor. If you'll recall, back on the second floor, on the second, in the back building, will be the extra large conference room, so large enough to accommodate our elementary principals' meetings. And then they'll have this kind of soft seating outside of it, as well as that tall table that we just saw on the previous page, so that if there's breakout work happening with their group, that they've got spaces to go to just outside of the conference room. And also for the staff that work here all the time, just to have that flexibility to go work from another space and kind of change your view for a little while. So we see this getting a lot of use.
Related to that, and that chair isn't in it, but next to this space up in the back building on the second floor, there's another area with a high top table, and the TV or the screen like we're using now is up on the wall next to it, so meetings can be taken right out there in the open. So that could be just a one-off meeting, having the capability, because I know that every time I had a meeting this morning talking about different items with folks from maintenance, and Mr. Green had joined us. I grabbed my laptop, I plugged into the screen, and we were able to go through and share the same document. So that capability, even though some might say it's out in the open or it's out in the hall, it's not really. It's what it's meant to be. So the furniture is flexible enough to be, just have a seat for a moment, or also have a small group breakout from an elementary principals meeting to work together and can still share their screen on the big screen and collaborate together right there in that space. And it's not walking into a traditional conference room, signing it up, signing it out, closing the door behind you. You're just right there. Let's just do this now, spend 15 minutes and meet and work.
That does remind me of one of the neat things too, and this is our last slide, so thank you, Ms. O'Brien. One of the features we'll have in those conference room too are these little panels that'll be on each one of them too, and it's really neat because it'll show you right at a glance of when that room is available, and the backlight will be green if it's available and red if it's in use. But you can see if maybe I'm walking by and it's open, and I can see that the next meeting's happening there in half an hour. So you can book the room right there for the next 30 minutes. So instead of having to run back to your office or go check it, that it'll be right there at a glance. So I could see that being used a lot by our office. So those are the few pictures we brought to share with you tonight. Again, I'm happy to share the finishes. We brought some of the fabrics with us so we could show you what that would look like. Just a reminder, this would be coming out of our capital projects fund. And again, that capital projects fund was funded from proceeds from sale of property. So again, it was the board's intent to align one-time revenues with one-time purchases such as this. And Mr. Francis brought the construction, what would he be, construction manager? Hard construction costs.
And we are doing the general contracting. Mm-hmm.
Yep, so brought that in March, and so this would round out this central office project. We're very happy that this falls in line with our overall budget for the project. In looking at what we spent in buildings and what we had as far as revenue available, we were really targeting about $3 million for this project. And with this furniture purchase, it still keeps us in line with our overall budget. So we've got for you tonight, again, I was not planning to go line by line, but I'm happy to do that if anything catches your eye. But this is a detailed budget. They've broken it up very nicely by floor and then by space, so you can see what's included in there.
And you can see the total, including shipping and installation, comes to just under $507,000. So, and again, that was in line with what we thought, because unlike other buildings, this is largely furniture that's going to house this. We don't have a lot of casework in here. So this is what we'll be filling our space with if the board approves it.
Yeah, if you look at many of the renovated buildings and look at their main offices, you'd see that it wasn't, the desks for the secretary, principals potentially, are actual casework that were built in through construction, which would fall under that construction budget. We don't have that in this building. It is all freestanding furniture. Even though the workstations that we showed you will interconnect and the electricity will be daisy chained together, the data, et cetera, it's still not considered an immobile and piece of casework. It can be broken apart and taken out. So everything in this building is pretty much furniture, whereas we had quite a bit of casework done in classrooms, the cabinetry, all those items. Much of what you'll see in looking at the floor plan and all of the file cabinets in here, we are putting a laminate top on top of those, so that it becomes now, like I described earlier, a space for folks that could work at, gather at, use to lay out documents, et cetera. So we're really trying to combine the workspace, furniture together to utilize.
You know, one nice thing that works out too with it being furniture is that it does offer flexibility. Should departments change or different needs arise, that we have more flexibility, that these aren't structural walls that we're going to have to change, that we do have flexibility with what we're purchasing. So
Yeah, if you put casework in for file cabinets or for items, credenzas, et cetera, like the conference rooms, the credenzas aren't built in, we're going to put furniture. If it's built in, that's the end of it. If we bring them in as furniture, and if we need to remove or add file cabinetry, it is a matter of obviously emptying them out, but you can move them. They're not built in, they're not, carpet isn't carved around it, et cetera. It is all laid in.
Good. Okay.
Questions, Mrs. Bradford?
Thank you. I think this looks excellent, wonderful. It's a long time coming, and I really do think that this is a great project for not only the central office administration, but our community, because our families come in, they utilize the building, and it's in my opinion, badly needed. This is something that is, I think, a wise decision. I do have a question on I know you said there's lots of open spaces for communicating and gathering for a meeting. Can you refresh my memory? In like the student services office where you might need a little more privacy, were there some rooms that were going to be just private?
Student services office is now and will continue to be, although it'll obviously be set up and look different, is an open space where they have their desks all together. So they don't have individual private offices, and that was by choice. But in need of a private space to meet, much like Mrs. Smith had described, we do have conference rooms and small meeting rooms that we're going to have that can be signed out. We currently use our Google Calendars to sign up our conference rooms in the building. This can tie in, so it can be right at the door itself. So if you just need a quick 15 minutes and you see that it's green, it's open, hey, no one's coming in for another 45 minutes, we've got time, let's duck in, you can use those. Again, there's also other small meeting rooms throughout. Some of the departments, like in finance, they have a small, it probably can hold 4, maybe 6 people in that meeting room, so they have that space. HR has a conference room that they can use that space. And then there are multiple private meeting rooms, conference rooms throughout the building for sign up.
Right.
And frankly, if anyone ever needed.
I remember I was trying to refresh my memory, but I thought there
Yeah,
were.
we do have it, and frankly, there's enough of the other ones where if somebody really needed it and all the quote-unquote common for sign-out conference rooms were booked up, there's other spaces that we still have. I have a very small meeting room. Someone can always use it if they need it. I know you would say the same.
Okay, great.
So I just want to actually clarify that the student services office will have a glass paneled wall along the corridor. So they're not, the entire office itself will have a glass
Yes,
paneled.
it's an enclosed
Yeah, so it is an
area.
enclosed space for their entire department.
Yes.
And then academic services department is opposite of that, but a little bit different, where they actually have private offices along the way with glass walls. So part of the design of the architect, you might remember, was to allow some of the natural light to come
Yes.
in and to flow across the entire floor, especially on the second floor. And so that is accomplished, but there are private areas as well as some areas that are sectioned off, but we're using a frosted glass or an opaque glass.
Sure.
So the light will still come through. So they're in an enclosed space, but it is still open and available within that room.
Perfect. I was just thinking about that as you were discussing all the area, because a lot of times I think there is a great area for you just to sit and talk and communicate, but there will be times, obviously, when people need some privacy, so just.
Definitely.
That
Okay.
was too, speaking of privacy, one of our goals for this renovation. And Phil and I like to tease, because our offices are right next to each other, that we just have ongoing conversations throughout the day because there is no privacy between the walls. So that was something that we talked to with the architect, and we're excited that we actually will have some privacy. And, you know, they say that if you're close to the wall, like maybe you could hear like a hum or something like that, but you can't actually hear, you know, words or anything like that. And that is definitely not what we have now, so.
Yeah, from a construction standpoint, there's sound attenuation that's been purposefully put into, in some offices, more so than others. The superintendent's office certainly has sound attenuation in her conference room and office for those private conversations, HR, et cetera. It'll be much more solid than here.
One thing.
Than here now, I should say.
Yep. And I don't know if we mentioned this, but there's also going to be a phone room on each floor. Did we say that yet
No,
tonight?
I don't think we did.
So it's really nice. So if you think of a staff member that's working in one of the open, you know, collaboration areas, or, you know, in the business office and IT, that if they do have a personal phone call that they have to make, that there is a phone room that they can go to, and there's one, again, located on the first floor and the second floor. So I think that's something really nice for our staff. And, you know, again, that could be those personal phone calls, but it also could be the student services coordinator that needs to call a parent and have a private conversation, that they could go in that
That's
room as well.
exactly what I was looking for.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yep.
Thanks.
Anything else? Well, this is impressive. The photos really add a lot, obviously. Allows us to picture kind of what things will look like. So looking forward to this. I assume you want it on the regular?
On regular for voting next week, please.
Great.
Mhm.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you.
That concludes building and site.
Thank you. The next item on our agenda is item 5, policy, and I will turn that over to Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, President Burton. We have one item, policy revisions, and Mr. Abate will be leading our discussion. Good evening.
Hello, how are you all?
Good.
Good evening.
All right, so as we discussed briefly last week, we have several policy items here. Nothing too heavy. We've just done some refresh of some language, eliminated some outdated pieces that I can highlight in a moment, and just generally kind of touched up these personnel policies. The only one that we that you kind of sent back to us to kind of take a closer look at, Superintendent Oquist and I, was GBC. And that was the first one on the list there, the professional personnel selection and recruitment. And once we had an opportunity to sit and look at it in more detail, we felt like there were more changes that were worthy of making there. Again, so in that initial paragraph, that was just a little bit of refreshing some language to make it flow a little bit. But that second paragraph, which is where we had that discussion about the classification of those positions, the term regular. And so we didn't feel like we really needed to even go that route, but just a little bit of a rearrange there. And we came up with teachers and other professional staff must be qualified for full state approval in the area of their specialty. Only teachers who have a valid teaching certificate or authorization will be considered for positions in the Livonia Public School District. So I think that that pretty much hits the point on that one. There was also just a couple of items in those last couple of paragraphs that didn't seem to be necessary. The promising candidates may be given the benefit of interviews by more than one staff member. We typically have interview teams that work through those processes, so it's pretty rare that you'd see one or two people in that anyway. And we also don't often have folks come and visit before they're finishing up that process, which is why we eliminated that final line. The teaching candidates are encouraged to visit prior to final selection. So that was that's where we landed on that particular policy.
Good.
Okay, any questions on that?
No.
Okay.
All right, then we had GBF, personnel teacher placement. This was one where we were eliminating a little bit of outdated language as it related to highly qualified. That was the cross out in the beginning there. The key point here being the red, all elementary, secondary, and special education teachers must be certified or authorized to teach the grade levels and subject areas to which they are assigned. I'll note at the bottom here, there's some language that we eliminated repeatedly through the remainder of the policies. These were things that we've already done, so it wasn't necessary to continue to have them there. For the public, the administration is charged with the development of administrative procedures consistent with this policy and applicable law. We have already done that, so it's no longer needed to be in the policy. And then additionally, this policy and the administrative procedures developed under this policy shall take effect upon the expiration of the applicable collective bargaining agreement currently in effect, or on the date that a successor collective bargaining agreement takes effect, whichever is sooner. Again, outdated language, it's already, we've already moved on from that, so not needed. So we took it out of each of the policies that go forward from there.
Okay, any questions on that?
No.
Okay.
We had an administrative procedure that we just reviewed and didn't offer any changes for. That was GBF. The teacher placement piece that went along with the last one. And then the GBG, staff reductions and recalls. So this was one where we suggested a little bit more of a significant rewrite. You can see we crossed out the entire initial piece. It relates, as I mentioned last week, it relates to two things. The general overview being the philosophy of the district to retain effective teachers in two situations. In situations where we are reducing a program or a position, or really any personnel decision that results in the elimination of a position. But then also the notion of applying the desire to keep effective teachers in a situation when we're operating with on a recall or hiring after one of those situations has occurred, a program reduction or the elimination of a position. So in the initial paragraph, it kind of all flowed together as one sentence, and we were trying to hit all of those things with a lot of commas and ors. I felt like that was difficult to read. And so I think with the revision here, we have two sentences that capture both situations, and I think make the point a little bit more plain for folks to follow.
Okay, questions on that one? All right.
All right. Then we had the administrative procedures to go with that. We were not recommending changes there. And then we had GBIA, teacher evaluations. Again, just small tweaks there. Added the designee piece because it had only listed the superintendent as having the function of adopting and implementing an evaluation tool. And then again, eliminated the language that was a little bit outdated there.
Questions, comments? Looks good.
And then the administrative procedures for GBIA, the teacher evaluations. This one, we had some significant changes, but again, it's removing items that no longer apply. So you see there's for the public, there's references to years that go back to 2013, 2014. Law and policy has changed to this point, so we remove that. Key piece there, the percentage of the annual year-end evaluation based on the student growth and assessment data will be equal to the percentage established by law. It gives us that general flexibility, so we know that we're always in compliance with whatever changes in the law may make. And then as you scroll into the second page, we just had, there was a list here, and there's just a lot of, it just seemed to flow better by saying, shall in the beginning, and then lining them up the way we did, so we didn't say that over and over again. So that's just a style piece that I think makes it flow a little better, nothing substantial.
Okay. Any questions on any of the policy changes? Tony, we've scratched out or crossed out the dates. We'll put the new dates for the meeting, the regular meeting when we...
26, 21.
Right. Okay.
The only thing I just realized, a small thing that I didn't note back on GBC, we didn't have a legal reference there for that piece, but there are a couple of legal references that refer specifically to this policy, so we've added those.
Okay. All right. If there are no other questions, then President Burton, we are concluded with policy.
Terrific.
All right, thank you very much.
Thanks, Tony.
Thank you, Mr. Bade.
This will go on the regular meeting for the first.
Yes, it'll be for a first reading. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
And the next item on our agenda is item 6, finance. Mrs. Bonnefield.
I don't have anything today, President Burton, Mrs. Oquist.
We do not.
Thank you.
We'll have quite a bit the next 2 months.
Eat your Wheaties, huh? The next item on our agenda is item 7, Personnel Committee. Mrs. Bradford.
President Johnson, I don't have anything to report. Mrs. Oquist?
I'm no longer present.
That's okay. We can-
President Burton.
Not a problem.
Oh, Lordy.
Okay, we're good on personnel? Terrific. Item 8 is Legislative Committee. Mrs. Jarvis.
We have no agenda items that I'm aware of. Mrs. Oquist, do we have any?
Nothing specific. I do want to make note that because we are moving forward with the standardized assessment as required by the state and the federal government, unfortunately, there has been no change with regard to the 3rd grade reading legislation. So at this point in time, that is still in effect, and so we will be communicating clearly with our families. We've long established where we are. Our position on that is that we will not be retaining 3rd grade students. We will be providing them clear supports, but using every good cause exemption at our disposal to have students move to 4th grade, and certainly having this law in place while we continue to work to meet the needs of students while in a pandemic really certainly begs the question of the necessity of that in normal times, let alone in this period of time. But I want to assure our families that we will communicate clearly with them about the process. We will support their learners as we have continued to do, and when they are in 3rd grade now and when they are in 4th grade next year.
Thank you, Mrs. Oquist. Are there any questions?
No.
And that concludes legislative, President Burton.
And that brings us to the end of our agenda this evening. Thank you to you folks who have hung in there with us for quite a lengthy meeting. We are now adjourned. Have a nice evening. Bye-bye.